Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you happen to be, you're in the new way, which could be the way new way, but way is WEIGH and new is KNEW, and we take everything we thought we knew and weigh it again. I'm here with my friend Dennis from Newcastle. Dennis, welcome to the new way again. We've talked many times here. I understand that you're back with your philosophy group. What you talking about?
At the moment, there's a conversation going on about Alfred North Whitehead, who was a guy in the early part of the 20th century. He was a physicist, really, but he wrote a few philosophy books, and they're very much based on kind of subatomic physics principles and things like that, because that was just happening at the time. So he's tried to come up with a model of the universe based on quantum theory, or a version of quantum theory as he understood it at the time. But I think he's probably one of the few people who actually did understand quantum theory, because there aren't
What
very
was
many of
his
them.
dates?
1927 is when Process and Reality came out, so
Okay.
it's kind of the 1920s into the 1930s. I don't know when he was born, but
So he
that's
was
when he was writing.
concurrent. He was concurrent with people like Blavatsky and Steiner and Walter Russell and that era.
Uh, with Walter Russell, yeah, Blavatsky and Steiner were a bit earlier.
Okay.
Blavatsky was 1888. He published its Secret Doctrine, and Steiner was 19 or something, very early 20th century.
Yeah, they were old people by the time Russell and Whitehead were young people.
Yeah, so they've kind of taken up the baton and moved with it. It all works. Philosophy all works with people critiquing the previous set of books. That's normally how it works. So you pick holes in the previous set of books and then integrate it with something else that you like. It's all interesting. It's interesting stuff because everybody's got a different take on it.
Well, I've got a different take on how time works, and I believe that we are all stuck in the same paradigm, but that there are different narratives that take place on human scale, and that those narratives are graded from each other by length of time it takes, so that everything is normalized. Human scale is, let's say, 90 years, 89 if we take Fibonacci. But the idea is that we could be on a picosecond scale for our 90 years, or we can take 26,000 years for those 90 years. And there's no way we can tell from our human existence which we're on. And by the way, they run concurrently. So the only difference between the two the difference between the paradigms is nil. The difference between the narratives is not very much, but any actor can act out of the narrative. And if what he's doing is going to provide a significant change, he gets bumped up to a longer lived narrative paradigm. We'll just call it a narradigm. But the narradimes, if it works, it gets more importance, it takes longer. If it doesn't work, as soon as it closes, whoever's conscious is in still alive, still in themselves, but now is set back in a faster running paradigm. It sort of works on the many worlds theory, where each time you make a decision, you generate a new world, but the worlds are ranked in a way of importance. But what the intelligence is that's deciding what the importance is, I have no way of knowing.
Right. Yeah. Many worlds theory is not that far away from Alfred North Whitehead. but he has the universe regenerating itself every kind of 100 milliseconds or whatever it is. I can't remember the amount, but it's literally millions and millions of times a second.
That sounds a lot like what Cliff High has been saying recently, in that it regenerates something like 500 billion times a second. So it blinks out and then comes back, and all motion is just these successive layers of the photograph, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like um, an expansion and contraction. I think Whitehead uses those words. So it expands so let's say every 100 millionth of a second, and then contracts and starts again. So that in theory that could include the many. That's basically many worlds, but described in a different way, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I think that a lot of the philosophy that we should know has gotten lost in the philosophy books and changed by the presence of artificial intelligence on the internet, so that the stuff that we believe is reinforced to us and the stuff we've never heard about is disappeared down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, like Giordano Bruno's pretty much vanished off the face of the earth. There's only the hardcore magicians talk about Giordano Bruno now, whereas it used to be like he was a well-known figure. When I was hanging out at the Theosophical Society, Giordano Bruno was it's only 25 years ago, but there's not very much. Like you can find stuff about him on the internet, on YouTube or whatever, but he's not known in philosophical circles, whereas actually he should be very well known.
Well, maybe we'll put together a list of people who should be known but really aren't. I know when I was growing up, two of my favorite philosophical personalities were Buckminster Fuller and Linus Pauling, because they both were peace advocates and they both had a scientific background. Nowadays, Buckminster Fuller has been sort of replaced by the buckyball, where anytime you say the name, somebody's going into a strange geometry that they don't even have right. It's sort of interesting because a buckyball, as designed, has 64 different faces, but the chemistry buckyball that they find by mass spec only has 60. And so it's like it's uncapped, and there's a way of getting into the buckyball in biological systems. And oh, by the way, I'd like to really know how many biosystems have come up with original forms of buckyball. I sort of think that a lot of what's going on now is they've piled lies upon lies for so long that they can't get to the basis of reality any longer. And consciousness is the basis of reality, and it works through water. And so water can modulate frequencies, and our consciousness sort of establishes ontologically. Hey, Anthony,
Yeah,
welcome to our discussion. It has been a while since we've been on.
yeah, welcome. Yeah, the consciousness is the key to the whole thing, really. Um, it's it's sometimes it's difficult to even if you want to distinguish between uh, consciousness and reality, which you can call reality consciousness and consciousness reality. But to talk about it, you kind of have to separate it out into different categories. So that's just to talk about it. It doesn't exist as different categories. It's just a way of talking about it. And sometimes people confuse the categories for the thing itself.
Yeah. Plus, the human consciousness as a collective is different from the individual consciousness that make up that collective consciousness. And so somebody who is on a human scale and thinking outside the box like we do tend to be able to morph the common consciousness a lot more than people who just are unconscious in their conscious.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point, there's a long period of my life where I was trying to decide whether I was getting kind of precognition about what was coming up or whether I was creating it myself. And I couldn't work out which was which. And I think sometimes it was precognition and sometimes it was me. It was a combination of me creating it and the precognition. But now I think it's mostly me creating it.
I think it's mostly you creating it also because at the level of the individual human, we have that ability to shift gears and take it off on another tangent. And if we take it seriously, within a short amount of time, we can find ourselves in a different time and place. But relatively speaking, there's no, I don't think this is the ultimate highest level of consciousness. I think that we are large sacks of water. The collective human consciousness or collective human superintelligence is the next level, but it plays on a different playing field. And there's a level of all life that creates consciousness, and maybe one even beyond it. But looking at the whole picture ontologically, if the form of what we live in is alive, we could be many, many scales deep in that and just sort of be a cog in the wheel as opposed to the whole wheel being the level of consciousness of Earth, which we've been brought up to semi believe. Some people think the planet is alive, other people don't. But on planetary scale, humans don't count for very much.
I've got a story for you, then, Lenny. I don't think I've ever told this story before, but I was traveling in 2001. I went over to New Zealand and Australia for 3 months with a friend of mine, and we were staying on the North Island in Auckland with his family. But we went to the place that he grew up. I won't name the place, but uh, on the beach there's a cave where a Maori prophetess used to live in like the 12th or 13th century or something, really long time ago. So me being me, of course, I went straight down there with a couple of candles and sat in this cave for about 45 minutes or an hour. Did a meditation and just opened up to whatever was in there. And it was remarkable. It was absolutely astonishing. What I think's happened is I've had some, well, you can either describe it as having a Kundalini awakening or as some kind of DMT experience, where a self-generated DMT experience, because I was seeing loads of geometric patterns and loads of like it was like people describe having a download of stuff. This was definitely a download of geometry. It was really overwhelmingly strange and very clearly a result of the meditation. It wasn't just something that happened randomly. And it was
Do you
also
think
a product of that place as well, I think, because I don't know what was going on in the cave, but there was some kind of fluorescent green something on the walls. So I don't know what that is. It's probably phosphorus or something.
it could be phosphors, which are different from phosphorus in that they're alive, algae scale, or maybe even smaller, but they have the ability to generate light. And in fact, I'm looking at water and I'm looking at light, I'm thinking maybe light is a smaller fractal of water, that they light isn't a particle at all. And the whole particle wave discussion of science seems to be trying to force a duality on a system that's a singularity, and thus explains it very badly. I wonder if you were in a portal that allowed you to exist in a reality that was so much smaller than human scale that it had to bring you up to date with the geological download to sort of pick your brain.
I'm not sure, Lenny, but I went through the whole of that experience. I wrote notebook after notebook after notebook of stuff. I literally, most of it makes no sense when you look at it 5 years later. And I didn't have the notebooks for 5 years. I had them for a couple of years. But I had to write it down because I wouldn't have been able to remember it all. I had to just write as much as I could down. So I was carrying all these books and this experience around with me in New Zealand. That was right at the beginning of the trip. So I was carrying that experience around with me for the next 2 or 3 months as part of that trip. So it was very much it was a location based thing. I'm sure it was to do with that location.
I wonder if it's anywhere near a ley line.
I would imagine. Well, it was right at the top of the North Island. So I would imagine if there's anything going on that's north to south, it would go from there down.
Yeah, there is a question of depth, and if you're down in a cave not on the surface, that depth also is a factor in location. So we position our coordinates on the surface of the earth. Going underneath the earth easily can lead to other experiences that aren't available within the cognizance that we hold.
Yeah, I mean, as part of that experience, there was another point in the trip where we were in Queensland, Queenstown, and from Queenstown to Milford Sound, they do a ferry trip out into the fjord. It's like a big bay. They do a round trip for the tourists from Milford Sound, but you can fly from Queenstown over the top of the mountains into the fjord. So I did a trip in a six-seater plane, like a tiny little plane, uh, over the mountains, and you could see straight, like in the state of consciousness that I was in, I could feel that the mountains were alive. It was clear as day to me that the earth was alive. But there's no way to explain that to anybody. It's just the way that my consciousness was at the time. That's how I perceived the whole thing.
Well, if you start looking at the Mayan calendar in depth, that they have 13 different scales and 20 different items. And when you start thinking about scale, from magnetic scale growing up to electric scale, and then it gets into sort of a planet, you can get up to planetary galactic scales, cosmic scale. There's all sorts of scales that are embedded in each other in these Mayan calendars. And it tells me that time sort of loops around, and that in order to escape the time frames that we have, it takes either going into self and meditating to get to one, or to take the scale of the whole as the one. And right now, I think that scales, some of the scales are fractal, but that's only when they're separated out by over 3 orders of magnitude. And when you get to that distance, over 3 orders of magnitude, 3.14 is pi. And maybe pi is the dividing line that allows fractals to exist, not the lower limit, or maybe the lower limit, but not the upper limit. And so fractals come about all through different consciousnesses, depending on the scale that the consciousness is working on. Good to see you also, Carol. Welcome. It has been a while.
Yeah, I think I was very much working on global scale rather than human scale at that particular point in my life, and very, very much concerned with the like ley lines and energy points and stuff like that. Doing just a very simple my version of it, because it can get very mathematical and very geometric, and I just I like to simplify everything. So I might be oversimplifying sometimes, but at least it's like enough to keep in my head, but not so much that it overwhelms me and takes over.
Well, I think there's at least 8 different scales between individual human scale and human global scale. They tell us we have 8 billion people. I really have to question that account. It might be fun to figure out a way of counting what the population actually is, or coming up with a game like Buckminster Fuller's World Game to play and get statistics that have to be meshed into a new sort of operating system. But I see a lot of different gamifications of how people are doing things, because right now the real world is overtly defined by the people who are in control of the situation. And there is no one really in control of humans on a broad scale. We're barely capable of keeping control of ourselves on individual scale. Uh-oh. I seem to have lost Dennis for the moment. Um, okay, we got you back. I guess you froze up.
Yeah, my browser tends to drop out after about 20 or 25 minutes for some reason. I'm not sure why. But it's been doing that the last few days.
I believe that there is something going on at Microsoft that is attempting to take all the Microsoft computers up into the next level of, it's not artificial intelligence, but provision of control. And so anybody who's on Windows 10 or less is starting to get real difficulties in having their hardware keep up with the software. And
Yeah,
basically, they just want to sell us more computers and get deeper into our operating systems. And I'm trying to work outside of the computers with just humans. And you can do that in a specific location, but you can't do that with the people you know and communicate with all over the world in the way we've built the social media. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to create a level of communications that uses all and any social media and doesn't restrict us to both needing to have StreamYard to broadcast this. In fact, I've got several different places that I can now make a recording and have an AI transcribe that recording and summarize things. But the AI tends to hallucinate a little bit, and it tends to leave out some important concepts because it doesn't fit the package that they're supposed to regurgitate to us, which is trying to make things circular, which circular works for one, but anything greater than one, you're not going to get circular. Two is more oval shaped, three is triangular, five is pentagonal, eight is cubic, 13 13 looks good on a tree of life, really, if you look at it that way. What's a symmetric 21?
Symmetric 21.
Yeah, is there a shape that includes 21 items that gives you a full symmetry?
If you half one of the, if you make it into a kind of tree of life shape, you could do it that way with 21.
I'll think about it. There's
I don't know. I
stuff.
can't think on the top off the top of my head. But
Yeah, I've been looking at geometry without having square angles. So the 90-degree angle that's forced upon us in world, everything's a big version of the box, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's only that we've lapsed into an idea that Descartes was the only one who knew anything, and so we used the Cartesian coordinates and think, therefore we are. But I think he got it backwards. I think that thought and intelligence and other things were here before the matter that built into the form that human is now.
yeah, I agree with you. I think everything's a product of first thought, if you want to put it that way. But whatever the first thought was, it's like I exist is basically the first thought you can have. It's like, who am I?
Yeah, and when we go back and talk about people like Whitehead and Walter Russell in the 1920s and that philosophy, shortly thereafter, there was an orchestrated attack to make that all disappear. And so I think that the worldwide schooling that we've got has sort of condensed the playing field of what's possible for most humans, but that we're at the point where that paradigm is falling apart completely, and that we're going to be beyond human scale, so that our responsibility to what else is out there doesn't stop when we get to collective human intelligence. Sort of funny. I'd love to figure out ways of designing experiments to have humans in groups of maybe 8 or 13 pretend they're the AI and come up with something in the AI format to then compare to the AI. I think it would be way ahead because the AI is so limited in the ability to program it. But I really think that the people who are programming and working and doing things with the AI are collectively being leveled out of the collective human experience, such that they're going to try and divide us again because it's the only way they can keep control.
Yeah, I mean, the AI we've got at the moment is really just a copy paste operation. All they're doing is borrowing stuff from websites and from Twitter or whatever, and then calling and making sense of it in a different form. That's all they're really doing.
It's actually mind theft of the whole human existence, because if they use it from what they pick up on the net and it's secondhand and they merge it into what they have, it it definitely hallucinates and it definitely throws some skews into what is, but it's basically programmed to circle people back into the is. They don't want us. out there exploring our consciousness?
Yeah, I mean it's a limiting factor. It's amongst many limiting factors. Artificial intelligence, because you can if you trust it to give you something that's real, then you're going to be disappointed. But it'll give you part of what's real and part of what's the official narrative.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work in the sociochemistry area that I've been working on, trying to design some experiments to get to understanding how people get to know who they are, who they're working with, and level up to focus on some projects. But it's sort of reinventing the wheel from human scale. I started a new website a couple months ago called newway.com, and I've been using the back pages of it to just dump ideas and work with things. And now I'm starting to one on one with the AI to flesh out the things that it grouped for me that I hadn't necessarily thought about because I didn't look at it by the form of grouping that AIs use. But I don't want to let the AI dream and make suggestions to me until after I've had the humans dream and make ex- come up with things that are different. But to
Yeah,
step out of the reality and be different automatically makes you the target of everybody who thinks they have to defend the reality because, hey, that's the way it is. And I find that if I treat money as energy and I manifest energy, I can make money. But if I treat money as money and feel I have to acquire it to use, it it doesn't have the value that the energy that I put into it has. So it's interesting. You mentioned earlier Whitehead and quantum, and that was really when they were just beginning to think about quantum. But what if we said that maybe Einstein and his theory of relativity, ignoring or saying that there's no ether, is absolutely incorrect, and we reestablish physics based on the presence of the ether? Would we change the physics of the world just by the perspective of our thought?
yeah. I think it's well. There's still. I mean, the scientific version doesn't include ether, but the transcendent theosophical version does, and there's lots of other places where you'll find the equivalent of ether, like five element theory as a version of ether in there. Well, it's all basically based on ether, and the healing system that I'm part of as earth, water, air, and fire as a combination under a higher level of the same thing. So it's got multiple layers of earth, water, air, and fire. So it's in the traditions. It's in the traditional healing systems. It's in the traditional uh, philosophical, theosophical systems. It's only really, but it's science that's missed it out, really.
Yeah, I wonder if I go back into my belief of fractal scales of consciousness, where the consciousness of the collective of water and the consciousness of collective of humans are the same, and maybe the collective consciousness of stars fits into that fractal also, because what we've essentially done is broadened our scale through telescopes and microscopes to make human scale just a little bit wider than it had traditionally been. And I think that there's got to be a way of increasing the frequency width of the human perspective. No question that bees and bugs can see in the ultraviolet. And I'm at the point in my study of household pets to believe that dogs and cats run their humans rather than humans taking care of their dogs and cats.
Yeah,
And
that sounds
so, yeah, there's so much going on in how things actually work on a molecular basis. And to me, the lesson I have from chemistry is that you need a mechanism in order for something to happen. So Neshama comes in. I agree 100% with you, Neshama, that we are collective sacks of water that create a separate intelligence, but that the collective water on Earth at the scale is 9 orders of magnitude smaller than humans scale. So that would let 3 other scales be between. But what happens on a scale is that your adjacent scale has a 50% similarity because when you move off, the larger is half and half. And then when you make the next expansion, it goes down to 25%. And the third expansion goes to 12.5%. And it's hard to recognize 12.5% out of 100%. That's about the limit of overlap. Our microscopes have taken us down to supposedly electron level, but it always bothers me that there's this little note that says this is a human rendition of something we don't know or an artist's rendition. And so they're making it up as they go. And we really don't know how it works. But if water is on molecular scale or atomic scale, then the particles that make up chemistry, elements, should have a chemistry to them in subatomic physics, but they don't.
yeah. I mean, the whole idea of manifesting from energy is you can you can use that. Well, I mean, I'm not qualified to really talk about it, but I will anyway, just because I can. Doesn't make me right. It just means I can talk. So if I'm doing a healing session, then I'm using my imagination to kind of describe how I want things to be rather than how I'm feeling them as they are. So I would get an impression of how things are in somebody's energy field, and then I use my imagination to correct that or to add something to it or to increase a particular quality or however you want to describe it. And I've got no real way of knowing that something's happening when I'm doing it in energy. But you can see in people's behavior when the session's finished that something's changed. So I can put two and two together and say that was partly created by my imagination within that context. So I don't know whether that's going down to quantum scale and doing tweaks at quantum scale and then it working its way up, or whether it's me doing things directly at human scale or whatever, however that happens. I really don't know, but I know that the imaginative part of the healing session, which there's a structure to it. It's not just free imagination. There is a structure to it, because there are ways of doing things. I was taught psychic surgery the healing process that I went through. Now, psychic surgery comes from the Pacific Islands, comes from where is it? There's the Philippines does a lot of psychic surgery and stuff like that. In their tradition, it's a shamanic tradition of moving energy around in people's energy fields and creating new stuff and taking out things that aren't necessary and like letting go of stuff for people in your imagination is a way to describe it. I mean, may not completely be accurate, but it's a way of describing it. So instead of somebody letting go themselves, you're helping them to let go of something.
Well, I
But
remember I
go ahead.
remember that you and I had talked about non-interactive reishi, where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could actually send reishi to people and heal them without having to be hands-on, like the practitioners had noted. And I think I've lost you again. You're frozen up. Let me see if this works. And no, it didn't. It lost his camera completely. Yes, Nashama, I agree with you there. I think that there are different mechanisms that can hijack reality, and that sometimes what becomes real was never real before it was thought into existence. That there's all sorts of different wormholes and other ways of communication, but the biggest thing to getting something done out of the ordinary is to believe it can be done. If you're trying to do something that you don't have the belief in being able to do, it won't happen. And that belief, when you break belief and change your mind, it has ramifications that sort of follow you into your future. So that when I decided that water was the source of consciousness rather than an organic structure like the brain, some of my water knowledge in other areas had to be changed to make it consistent before I had a complete picture of the chemistry. And again, I don't know that I have a complete picture of chemistry, just that I have a more complete picture than most people who have studied chemistry here in the present.
Yeah, the belief's an important part of it. In terms of manifestation, at least, it's an important part of it. Yeah, the thing about water and consciousness is interesting. If you go back as far as Edward Bach, who again is the early part of the 20th century. So all of this around the 1920s, 1930s, there was a lot of stuff going on, and I think a lot of it gets ignored. But Bach flower essences in general, rely on that principle of water carrying consciousness.
In a way, the whole field of homeopathy works that way. When you've made your dilution beyond 1 part per quantity, say 1 part per million, you can
Yeah,
still make dilutions and the essence is still there. But how that essence takes form, I don't think is currently explainable with our human knowledge of science. I think we really need to be kicking at the side, kicking the wheels of and the tires of science and making it so that scientists have to be consistent across fields. No more physics get their field to do it their way, chemists get their field to do it their way, biologists get their field, medical professionals get their field. No, it's all one field. Let's get it right, and then we can go from there. And I don't know
Yeah,
that we even have the periodic table right. I mean, Mendeleev had some advantages to being Mendeleev had some advantages to being tied in with a new system that was coming out and he had an explanation. But I like Walter Russell's waveform periodic table a whole lot. And there's a lot of things less than hydrogen in mass that ought to have a chemistry to them as we extrapolate.
yeah. I mean, I've looked at Walter Russell a little bit. It's a bit over complex for me, but it's very similar to there's a German guy called Schelling, German philosopher who came up with more or less the same thing of two opposing spirals or two opposing principles in nature. Uh, he was before Walter Russell, so I think Walter Russell might have got some of his stuff from Schelling, but I don't
Right
know.
now, there's a guy who has been doing some stuff on the internet called the primer field. I forget what his name is, but when I look into his primer field stuff, it had sort of like an hourglass with clockwise and counterclockwise movement of particles going through a middle, and it really it struck me that there was something there, but he didn't follow through, so I didn't get the whole explanation. And I reached a point where I sort of took a tangent. Life
Right.
takes tangents sometimes.
Oh, it certainly does. Certainly does. Yeah, the healing system that I'm part of or was part of that I was trained in has got clockwise and counterclockwise spirals in it. So it makes sense to me because I'm used to using clockwise and counterclockwise spirals in my healing.
Yeah, there's a lot to the spiral order of things. And I have a device that spins my water in a spiral. And I have done enough experimentation with it to know that if I'm not drinking my structured water that has been spiraled, my energy doesn't last near as long through the day. But I'm probably only good for about 14 hours a day. I need 10 hours sleep, and sometimes I'll get 12 or 15 hours sleep. Whereas when I was much younger, I could run on like 4 hours sleep. So sleep time is a different consciousness, and I'm not sure how the manifestation of dreams into reality conscious of humans actually works. I can watch my cat sometimes have muscle spasms when he's asleep just because I know he's dreaming about something. Maybe he's catching that big mouse or something. But
Yeah, it's like dogs do that all the time. It's like they're chasing rabbits. When they're asleep, their legs start to go.
yeah. Well, good. It was great to catch up with you. I'm glad we got to talk about some basic philosophy. Um, at some point, I'll want to explain in depth how the sociochemistry model that I'm developing can take what we find on a social basis and use forms of nature to take us back from humans being exceptionally above nature to humans being part of the ebb and flow of nature and how that goes. And I think the ontological model of individuals being partner with the whole, where the whole is intelligent and can help the individual on the basis of thought and understanding and belief. I think that's where we're headed. And that maybe within the next year or two, we'll have a whole different system in which to deal with our realities.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly my personal experience, Lenny. For what it's worth. I mean, it's a place to start. It's personal experience, but it's not going to be the whole thing.
No, it's not. And I've seen some walk-ins recently where people that I know are no longer acting like the people I know, but something's going on there. So I think that sitting back and reevaluating how things work is a good thing to do, because paying attention to the world as it works right now isn't going to get us anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the the thing that surprised me is that quantum jumping works, because it doesn't look like. But then the Immunix was the same with me. It looks like it won't ever work. It looks so ridiculous that it can't possibly work, and yet it does.
I'm in the process of quantum jumping now, and it's taking a while, but my reality
And
is
quantum
changing completely.
jumping's the same. It's like a simple model.
Well, it's a matter of whether a place is a singularity or a multiplicity. And if we're on different timelines at the same time, that would make it a place a multiplicity. And so the same place doesn't necessarily overlap from individual life streams. And so some people can go to Stonehenge and have a magical experience. Other people can go to Stonehenge and say, I wonder how they moved around these big rocks. It looks like I have lost Dennis again. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Do I have you back? I do not. This was an excellent return to YouTube, but I'm probably not going to do it all that often because we need a new type of social media that actually works. And my head right now is in educational systems. So be well, have a good one, and it was a pleasure being here with all of you.